everybody, this is Captain Fred, your host for Aviation Theater, and a proud member of the San Diego Aerospace Museum, the first place to visit when you come to San Diego. We have a good program for you today, and we'll get started right after this important message.
A quick roll call to make sure everybody on my flight is on this bus. So I'm going to call
Here they are loaded on the bus. Would you continue our guided tour?
Well, what we're doing right now is we're checking the passenger manifest to make sure we know who's who on what plane in case anything should happen. In case of an emergency, we do a passenger briefing and we tell about the exits and the earplugs and the in-flight movies or what have you, just like you would on a regular airplane. Here we're climbing the stairs to the KC-135. We got our nice stairs out for the group today. Normally we have big steep ladders to crawl up.
The tail is 3 or 4 stories high.
That's correct. I think it's about 3 stories high.
What's going to happen today is we're going to fly down. We'll be in a holding pattern close to the Grand Canyon, and we'll be flying toward the receiver pilot coming at us. He'll be 1,000 feet below us, and when he gets about 20 miles away, we'll turn in front of him. We'll roll out on track right about a mile ahead of him, and he'll come in and pull up to the number 2 guy, which is behind us, get gas from him first. It'll drop down and get gas from us. We'll fly eastbound, probably about 35 minutes, turn around, head back toward the Grand Canyon, and then drop them off and come on home. Should be a pretty straightforward mission.
Now, you're going to be refueling more than one airplane?
No, actually, there's 2 KC-135s, which are the refuelers, and there's one 141. And normally when we're in what they call a cell mission, or where there's more than one aircraft, there'll be one aircraft on the trail, and normally the receiver will go to them first, get their fuel, and then come to us.
So it takes 2 tankers to refuel an airplane?
No, sir. Mainly we do that just for the training purposes. 99% of the sorties that we conduct, basically here from Marchfield and all over the United States, is all for training. Training for the pilots to feel how it is to have a big receiver behind you. Training for the receivers to see how it is to approach a plane with 4 big thrusts of jet stream coming off the back end of them. Almost all of our missions are training here, and we don't give them a lot of gas. Kind of passing the gas is secondary in this case. We just do it for practice in case we have to do the real world thing someday.
If it was the real thing, how much fuel would you be able to pass on to another plane?
Well, every receiver is different. For instance, fighters can only carry so much fuel, and in order, for instance, to get across the ocean, we do what's called a fighter drag, where we might take 6 or 7 fighters, and they'll be lined up in position on either side of our wings, maybe 4 on one side and 3 on another. And as we cross the ocean, we give them fuel. Because they're so small, they can only carry a little bit. Because they travel so fast, what little they do carry, they burn quickly. So in order to get across the ocean without actually ditching in the ocean, they have to be refueled on the way. So they're a little different than a big receiver. Some of our big receivers can take up to 70, 80,000 pounds of fuel just to get across the ocean, and then that will be dependent upon how much cargo they're carrying. Just like anything else, the heavier they are, the more gas that they use. In this case, we're probably only giving them, maybe 1,000 pounds, and that's just to be able to say we did it. Everything else is just approach back and forth to feel how it is to make a contact.
You don't measure fuel in gallons, you measure it in pounds.
That's correct. We measure in pounds. To be honest with you, I'm not sure what that is. I think it's just for accounting procedures.
Now this is the boom being inserted into the receiver plane.
That's correct. Basically the hash marks represent how much further we have in front of the receptacle. Most receptacles are streamlined and centerline on the top of most receivers. As you can see, we are close enough to see the actual pilots' faces and wave to them, and
Now you have something there. It looks like a boomerang on the probe. You actually fly that thing like an airplane.
That's correct. Where the letters are, those are actually what they call the ruddervators, and those help to steer the boom. The receiver comes in and makes a certain approach using lights underneath the outside of the plane that we are maneuvering. In order for them to do that, they just keep an eye on the lights, and then those lights tell them when to stop. I steer the boom into the top of the plane and make the contact.
Now, tell us about this chart.
The shot that you just saw was Major Todd Keegan. He's one of our navigators. And he sits kind of side saddle up on the flight deck of the KC-135. And we call them charts and not maps. The navigators get mad at us if we call them a map. Basically, that's showing our route of flight. And there you can see where we're actually going to make the rendezvous with the receiver. And then,
what are the squares and circles for? Is it a rendezvous or a checkpoint?
Those are checkpoints, yes. Depending upon the air refueling track that we're in, those are checkpoints for different parts of the track. In this case, we're flying over the Grand Canyon. It may be a little hard to see there or depicted there in the chart.
And the ovals are a pattern that you fly while you're refueling?
Those are the patterns that we fly, and then there's also turnaround points as well.
Would you do a refueling in one oval, or would it take several ovals?
Well, it depends. Sometimes when we're on track with fighters, they come up for one contact, and then they go and do whatever it is that they do. They have their bombing missions and their raids and what have you, and their practices on their test ranges. Then they may come up for what they call a post-strike air refueling, which we saw a lot of in Desert Shield and Desert Storm. Sometimes we make several ovals. It depends on how long we're scheduled to be on track, and maybe there's another set of receivers and air refuelers that are scheduled to be there right after us. It can be as short as a half hour or as long as 2 hours, even longer depending on the mission. This is another approach by the C-141. The boom is about 15 feet long, 15 to 20 feet long, and then there's a more flexible hose that I actually extend into the receiver, and that can go out to as far as 20, 25 feet, but our limit is to keep it inside of 18 feet from the bottom, from the tip of the end of the hard part of the boom there.
Now, the boom is much too flimsy to keep the two planes connected, so you have to actually fly like Siamese twins.
That's correct. At that point, once the contact is made, it's my responsibility to keep the boom aligned with the receiver as he moves. Of course, I have my limits left and right, and up and down, and forward or aft. But you basically try to maintain, inside of those limits. And it's up to those pilots and our pilots up front at that point. Now, we do practice autopilot off techniques just in case something should happen to the autopilot and the gas does need to be transferred. Sometimes the pilots are in the sun, right into it. Sometimes the sun is behind them. And it's just kind of up to Mother Nature, I guess. As you can see, this is a day air refueling. As a boom operator, I have not only requirements during the day, but requirements at night.
Do you have like Christmas tree lights or something for night refueling?
Well, every receiver has a different set of lights. There's lights up on the vertical stabilizer of our plane. There's lights at the end of the boom, and also the receptacle for the receiver has lighting as well. And sometimes when you have a full moon, you have the benefit of the light from that as well. That there is a shot of the other KC-135 being refueled, or rather refueling the 141.
At what altitude and speed do you do the refueling?
In this case, we're doing it about 285 knots, and the altitude is anywhere between 22 and 26. Every receiver is different. Sometimes for fighter airplanes, they actually have to slow down for us about as slow as they can go, 315 knots, and that's just about as fast as we can go when we're trying to do air refueling. So it's kind of a compromise there.
Is the speed, well, the speed is according to the ships. Is the altitude set, or is it dictated by weather, or how do you choose the altitude?
The altitude varies depending on the receiver. It also varies depending on the weather, and there are restrictions placed upon each track by the FAA as well, depending on whether there's a city below you or whether there's other military operations going on or what have you. So there's a lot of variables for where the altitude is.
I noticed padding on the inside of the plane. Is that for insulation?
Strictly for insulation, sir. Yes, it can get very cold in that plane if they didn't have it. As it is, the air conditioners are working overtime to keep the plane warm at some altitudes.
Now you're flying over desert. It's probably 120 down there, but what would the temperature be up inside the airplane at that altitude?
At that altitude, it kind of depends on the plane itself. Some the heaters in some of the planes are better than others, but probably I'd say it was maybe 60, 65 degrees in the plane right now. Sometimes a little cooler down in the boom pod where we're laying. If you can't actually tell from the view that you're getting, we're actually laying in the bottom part of the KC-135 on our stomachs. All of my controls are below me, and my chin is on a chin rest.
Yes, you're in the very tail, the very back.
That's correct. This is a shot of our engines. We've actually since been upgraded engines to what they call our model engines, and they have a little more thrust, they're a little more quiet, and they have no thrust reversers. Here you see another approach by the 141. They're approximately 20 to 30 feet away at this point. And although you can't see them, there are lights beneath the plane that I am maneuvering to show them to move forward basically gradually, little by little. When I come off of those lights, they know to stabilize in the position that they're in, and then I'll effect the contact.
Is it a red, yellow, green like a traffic stop light, or how do you signal?
Yeah, it's similar to a red, yellow, green. It's kind of arrows. Now, once we actually get in contact, the lights at the bottom of the plane, the PDI lights or the pilot director indicators, actually follow the movement of the boom. So at that point, the lights are telling the pilot whether he's too far up or too far down, or basically too far forward or aft. As far as the azimuth or the left or right, that's kind of obvious to him. He knows where he should be, and he makes those maneuvers. Now, I can't talk to him if I need to, but normally our training is to keep it down to a minimum, so just in case we have the radio silent procedures in an actual wartime situation, that's what the PDI lights are for.
So you could actually do the refueling without any radio transmissions.
That's correct, sir. And we would do that in a wartime situation. This is the actual maneuvers down into the boom pod. You can see you step down into the bottom of the plane. There my chin is on a chin rest and my controls are below me.
I notice you're wearing gloves. Is that for warmth?
Yes, that's for warmth. Sometimes back there in the boom pod it's considerably colder than it is up on the cargo compartment of the KC-135, so I wear them just for comfort.
Oh, there's a retraction.
That's correct. Probably at that point, F5. Even though we're doing this for show, at that point, it's what it would look like if he had received all of his predetermined offload, or all of his fuel, and we make the disconnect at that point. Now, there doesn't need to be anything said between the two of us. We just make the disconnect based on what we know to be how much fuel was transferred, what have you. Now, the fuel transfer, as far as the amount goes, is something that is kept track of up in the flight deck.
Would you describe our approach and landing?
Well, we've come back on the way from the Grand Canyon. Obviously, the boom is stowed up against basically the bottom of the plane. It's all put away. The crew chiefs get angry if we let the boom drag down on the runway when we land.
Thank you, Master Sergeant Debbie McGuan, for being our host and narrator for this refueling mission.
Thank you, sir.
Well, that's our show for today. We hope you enjoyed it. We certainly enjoyed bringing it to you. I'd like to thank the San Diego Aerospace Museum, the first place to visit when you come to San Diego, for bringing Aviation Theater to you. Until next week, this is Captain Fred saying, God bless America and happy landing!